We are continuing with our series of lessons coming from the Sermon on the Mount. Uh, you know, in the Sermon on the Mount, Christ did something that is very different from what the people knew about at that time. And one of the major lessons that Jesus wanted the people to know and us today to know is to learn about Christianity is the fact that it is a religion that comes from the heart. The religion that comes from the heart, a pure heart, religion that has got to do with our attitude and also to do with a motive. So when he presented the Sermon on the Mount, he said things like, "You have heard it said," and then he would go, "But I say to you," right? So he's going to change their way of thinking. He's going to change the way that men thinks. He said that many times, right? And it's because everything that he's asking us to do comes from a pure heart, is what he wants. Because God looks at the heart. When he talks about adultery, you know, he talks about looking, he says, when you look at a woman, right? Uh, it's okay to look, but when you look at a woman with lust, because that lust comes from your heart, right? And when he talks about giving, he says, what did he say? He say, make sure your left hand does not know what your right hand does, because you give in secret. And when you pray as well, he said, go into the cupboard and pray. Today and in those days, they do not do that out of a pure heart. They do that more to show to other people that they are very religious, right? They're very religious. In fact, one of the greatest commandment when Jesus was asked about, he says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your strength and all your might. And the second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So it is a very personal thing that's between you and God, right? He says you, that means us. He didn't say your mother, your friend, your wife, not that. You. It is a relationship that you have between yourself and God, right? So, and it's the same whenever we do things like even today when we partake of the Lord's Supper, which we did just now, right? If you look in the religious world, there will be a very, very pompous ceremony with smoke, with their gowns and all those things. And yet, Paul says that Jesus tells him, "What do? You are instead you are to examine yourself, right? Not so much show it out." So it's always been a private thing between you and God. And coming to fasting, concerning the matter of fasting, Jesus said this that Cheng Yu read for us just now. He says, moreover, when you fast, right, do not be like the hypocrites with a sad countenance, for they disfigure their face that they may appear to men to be fasting. That's the key word. They appear to men to be fasting. And Jesus said, surely I say to you, they have their reward. But you, when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, so that you do not appear to men to be fasting, but to your Father who is in the secret place. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. What's fasting? You know, I always love food, right? Fasting is something that I have to say myself that I don't do, because for health reasons, I if I eat at a very specific time, in fact, very accurate time. In the morning, I have breakfast. At 12 o'clock in the afternoon, I have my lunch. 6 o'clock in the evening, I have my dinner. If I miss that, I tend to get gastric problems. So I'm very religious in my eating. Whereas fasting, according to the Strong's definition, is to abstain from food, or not taking, or not eating, or without taking food. You know, in this remarkable, some of the examples of fasting is done for us, for example, in Esther chapter 4, verse 16, where Esther has decided that she will go and help the Jews. She said to the Jews, that, go gather all the Jews who are present in Sushan and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day, and my mates and I will fast likewise. And so I will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. And another example is King David. Right? David, when in 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 15 and 16, we read that when then Nathan departed to his house, and the Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife bore to David, and it became ill. And David therefore pleaded with God for the child, and David fasted and went in and lay all night on the ground. And even Jesus himself, we learn that he fasted when he was tempted by the devil, or before he was tempted by the devil. In Matthew chapter 4, verse 1 and 2, then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, afterwards, he was hungry. Paul also, as an example, he fasted when he encountered Jesus on the way, on the road to Damascus in Acts chapter 9, verse 9. We read that he was 3 days without sight, and he neither ate nor drank. So these are some examples of people in the Bible that fasted, right? So one of the remarkable passage about Matthew chapter 6, verse 16 to 18 about fasting is this. Jesus neither commands nor forbid fasting. He didn't say that you have to fast, and he didn't say that you cannot fast. In fact, he assumes that at some time or another, we will fast. He says, when you fast, it's an assumption that you will fast, right? So what Jesus is forbidding is not that you cannot fast or you will fast. He is forbidding to abuse the fasting. That's what he is about. It is all right to fast as long as it is not a hypocritical display of religious, in order to impress men. See, that's what happened in those days. He says, when you fast, like the hypocrites, he calls them hypocrites because what do? They disfigure their faces. They make faces to make sure that people know that they are hungry, they are haggard, right? So that men knows that they are fasting. And Jesus said that when you do that, you already have your reward, right? But when we fast, we are to anoint our head and wash our face so that people do not know that we are fasting. He says, so that you do not appear to men to be fasting, but to your Father who sees in secret. and he will reward you openly. So that's what they are supposed to do. In the Old Testament, the only place that we can get to infer that fasting is commanded is in Leviticus chapter 16, verse 29. Here Moses said, "This shall be a statute forever for you. In the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you shall afflict your souls and do no work at all, whether a native of your own country or a stranger who dwells among you." And the term afflict your souls means self-denial, and in particular, it could lead to a state of humiliation and penitence because of their sins, and it would include the idea of fasting. In the New Testament, however, fasting was never commanded as a regular religious practice. However, there are many people who would voluntarily fast for various times or various reasons. And Jesus has always said that if it is done in the proper attitude and the motive, it was acceptable. Right. It appears that in Israel, by the time that we come to Zechariah chapter 8, verse 19, they have already established national days for fasting. He says, "Thus say the Lord of hosts, the fast of the 4th month, the fast of the 5th month, the fast of the 7th, fast of the 10th, shall be joy and gladness and cheerful feast for the house of Judah. Therefore love, truth, and peace." And by the time of Jesus coming into the world, the Pharisees have attempted to impress their peers with their piety, fasted on Thursday and Monday of each week. So every week they fast Thursday and Friday. And the reason they do that is because they believe that Moses ascended into the mountain on the Thursday and he descended on the Monday. And you can find that in Luke chapter 18, verse 10. So one of the reasons that we have for fasting is sickness, death, calamity, or sin. In Psalm chapter 35, verse 13, King David said this. He said, But as for me, when they were sick, my clothing was sackcloth. I humbled myself with fasting, and my prayer would return to my own heart." You know, when David's son, who was born of Bathsheba, was sick, what did he do? He fasted and he prayed. And you see that in 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 16 to 23. In fact, the children of Israel fasted for 7 days when King Saul died. 1 Samuel chapter 31, verse 13. Jehoshaphat proclaimed a fast throughout all Judah as he contemplated their imminent battle with the children of Moab and the children of Ammon. And then, when Israel was unhappy with the task of fighting against Benjamin, they also fasted. And upon hearing the prophet Jonah, the people of Nineveh realized that of their sinful condition, they also fasted. So that's one of the reasons for fasting. If one's heart is filled with sorrow, the thought of the desire of food diminishes. You know, when you feel sad, when there's a death that happens in the family, and you feel sorrowful, a lot of the time, food is one of the last things that you think about, right? So fasting is a natural reaction to sorrow and to grief. In fact, when John the Baptist was in prison, his disciples came to Jesus and asked his disciples, "Why is it that they do not fast?" Matthew chapter 19, Matthew chapter 9, verse 13. John was in prison, and his disciples were sorrowful, so they were fasting. And so to them, it's an appropriate question to ask Jesus and his disciples, and they ask, why is it that they do not fast? And Jesus said to them, can the children of the bride chamber mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? That means while Jesus is with them, they will not fast. But when Jesus left them, they will fast. You see that in Matthew 9, verse 14 to 17. So when Jesus gets taken away, that's when they will fast. So another reason for fasting is that when one becomes deeply concerned about spiritual matters, right? And I want you to look at the connection between fasting and praying. In Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 1 to 11, when Nehemiah was told about the dreadful condition of Jerusalem, what did he do? He was sad. And because he was sad, what did he do? He fasted and prayed. We learn in Acts chapter 10, verse 30, about Cornelius, how he was a devout man. And he wanted to know the truth and wanted to live in accordance with the truth. What did he do? He fasted and he prayed. Before the church in Antioch sent Barnabas and Paul on their first missionary journey, they fasted and prayed. Acts chapter 13, verse 1 to 3. In fact, Saul of Tarsus, after his encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus, what did he do? He fasted and prayed for 3 days and 3 nights while waiting for Ananias to come to tell him what he must do. Acts chapter 9, verse 9. There is a connection between fasting and praying. Like I said, personally, I have not fasted, but I know Carol does. And when she does that for a particular reason, when somebody is having an operation, for instance, she will fast and will pray for it. Fasting always goes with prayer. You fast and you pray. Sometimes people can become so engrossed in spiritual matters that the desires for their physical body are temporarily suspended. We know Moses, when he was receiving the commandments from the Lord, he fasted for 40 days and nights. And Elijah, when he was fleeing from Jezebel, he too fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. And after Jesus was baptized, he was led into the wilderness and he fasted for 40 days and nights. So, in conclusion to this very quick lesson about fasting, Jesus is not opposed at all to fasting. In fact, he assumes that at some stage or another, we will fast, right? What he is opposed to is the making of fasting a mechanical arrangement. That means you just do it mechanically. Like I say, Christianity is a religion about your relationship with God. Christianity is a religion about a pure heart, about attitudes, and about motives. When we fast, we are to fast from the heart. When our heart is filled with grief and sorrow, or when we become deeply involved or engrossed in spiritual matters, a proper reaction to that is fasting. There is no doubt that at some time all of us will have an occasion to fast. And when we do that, we must do it with a pure heart. We must have the proper attitude and motive. Then it will be a matter between us and our Heavenly Father. Like Jesus said, your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. I hope that this lesson is useful for people who wants to know about fasting. Like I said, it is a religion of pure heart, a religion where we concentrate on our heart rather than an outward appearance. It's between you and God. When Jesus said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, he means me, he means you. It is a direct relationship, got nothing to do with anybody else. You don't have to show it to anybody else. You only have to show it to God. And you do it in secret. You don't have to do it openly. When you help people, when you give, he says, do not let your left hand know what your right hand do. Because it is between you and God. When you pray, it is between you and God. You don't have to show other people that you are praying. It is a very, very personalized relationship between you and God. I want to finish off this morning by reading Colossians chapter 1, verse 19 to 23, that Stephen read earlier when he was doing the Lord's Supper. In Colossians chapter 1, verse 19, the Apostle Paul, inspired by the Holy Spirit, tells us this. He says, for it pleased the Father that in him all the fullness should dwell, and by him to reconcile all things to himself, by him, whether things on earth or things in heaven, having made peace through the blood of his cross. And he's telling that about Christ, right? And then he moves on to talk about us. And you, who once were alienated and enemies in your mind by wicked works, yet now he has reconciled. How? In the body of his flesh through death, to present you holy and blameless and above reproach in his sight. So he tells us about Christ. He tells us about ourselves. All right. But in reality, he tells all of us, Jesus went to the cross for everybody. Everybody in the world, all of us were once alienated and enemies by wicked works. All of us are now reconciled in the body. How? Because he died for us. Right? But the things that separate us from other people, the things that separate a Christian from other people is this. In verse 23, he says, if indeed you continue in the faith. For you to be able to access that salvation, for you to be able to access the reconciliation, you have to continue in the faith. Grounded and steadfast, and are not moved away from the hope of the gospel which you have heard. If you are not a Christian this morning, that is what separates us Christians from non-Christians. You need to continue in the faith, in the gospel. You need to believe the gospel. You need to hear the gospel, believe, repent, confess Christ, and be buried in the waters of baptism, and you will be in the faith. And then you will be able to access the salvation that's presented to us, the reconciliation that Paul talks about. If you are not a Christian, I encourage you to do that, be able to do that so that you can be reconciled to God. And if you are a Christian and you feel like you might have fallen away at some stage, fallen short, I pray that you will come back as well. Verse 23 says, you continue in the faith, continue in the gospel, grounded and steadfast, and are not moved away from the hope of the gospel.